Well, hello. It is a super, super sunny Friday, April 3rd. Project Pandemic Day number 28, I think, and was supposed to be teaching day number 13, but we decided that we'd have a screen-free Friday. Clearly, I'm breaking that rule. And so today ended up being a day of a lot of planning, and now finally, some Paradise Lost. All right, we are at book 2. And I think I'm going to read all the way to line 389, right after we have a vote. If you remember, we left off with Pandemonium erupting like lava out of a fiery mountain down in hell, and we've heard from, and I stumbled through, all of the most powerful of Satan's minions, and a lot of other words too, while I was stumbling. And now we are getting ready to start with book 2. So, yeah, without further ado. Book 2, The Argument. The consultation began. Satan debates whether another battle to be hazarded for the recovery of heaven. Some advise it, others dissuade. A third proposal is preferred, mentioned before by Satan, to search the truth of that prophecy or tradition in heaven concerning another world and another kind of creature, equal or not much inferior to themselves, about this time to be created. Their doubt who shall be sent on this difficult search. Satan, their chief, undertakes alone the voyage. He is honored and applauded. The council thus ended. The rest betake them several ways and to several employments, as their inclinations lead them, to entertain the time till Satan return. He passes on his journey to hell gates, finds them shut, and who sat there to guard them, by whom at length they are opened, and discover to him the great gulf between hell and heaven. And, with what difficulty he passes through, directed by chaos, the power of that place, to the sight of this new world which he sought. All right. High on a throne of royal state, which far outshone the wealth of Ormus and of End, or where the gorgeous East with richest hand showers on her kings barbaric pearl and gold, Satan exalted sat, by merit raised to that bad eminence, and from despair thus high uplifted beyond hope, aspires beyond thus high, insatiate to pursue vain war with heaven, and by success untaught, his proud imaginations thus displayed. Powers and dominions, deities of heaven, for since no deep within her gulf can hold immortal vigor, though oppressed and fallen, I give not heaven for lost. From this descent, celestial virtues rising will appear more glorious and more dread than from no fall, and trust themselves to fear no second fate. Me though, just rights and the fixed laws of heaven did first create your leader, next free choice, with what besides in council or in fight hath been achieved of merit, yet this loss, thus far at least recovered, hath much more established in a safe, unenvied throne, yielded with full consent. The happier state in heaven, which follows dignity, might draw envy from each inferior. But who here will envy whom the highest place exposes foremost to stand against the thunderer's aim, your bulwark, and condemns to greatest share of endless pain? Where there is then no good for which to strive, no strife can grow up there from faction. For none sure will claim in hell precedence, none whose portion is so small of present pain that with ambitious mind will covet more. With this advantage then to union and firm faith and firm accord, more than can be in heaven, we now return to claim our just inheritance of old, surer to prosper than prosperity could have assured us. And by what best way, whether of open war or covert guile, we now debate. Who can advise may speak. He ceased, and next him Moloch, sceptered king, stood up, the strongest and the fiercest spirit that fought in heaven, now fiercer by despair. His trust was with the eternal to be deemed equal in strength, and rather than be less, cared not to be at all. With that care lost went all his fear. Of God or hell, or worse, he recked not, and these words thereafter spake. My sentence is for open war. Of wiles, more unexpert, I boast not. Them let those contrive who need, or when they need, not now. For while they sit contriving, shall the rest, millions that stand in arms, and longing wait the signal to ascend, sit lingering here, heaven's fugitives, and for their dwelling place accept this dark, opprobrious den of shame, the prison of his tyranny, who reigns by our delay? No. Let us rather choose armed with hell flames and fury, all at once, or heaven's high towers to force resistless way, turning our tortures into horrid arms against the torturer. When to meet the noise of his almighty engine, he shall hear infernal thunder, and for lightning see black fire and horror shot with equal rage among his angels. And his throne itself, mixed with Tartarian sulfur and strange fire, his own invented torments. But perhaps the way seems difficult and steep to scale with upright wing against a higher foe. Let such bethink them, if the sleepy dench of that forgetful lake benumb not still, that in our proper motion we ascend up to our native seat. Descent and fall to us is adverse. Who but felt of late when the fierce foe hung on our broken rear insulting, and pursued us through the deep, with what compulsion and laborious flight we sunk thus low? The ascent is easy then. The event is feared. Should we again provoke our stronger, some worse way, his wrath may find to our destruction. If there be in hell fear to be worse destroyed, what can be worse than to dwell here, driven from bliss, condemned in this abhorred deep to utter woe, where pain of unextinguishable fire must exercise us without hope of end, the vassals of his anger, when the scourge inexorably and the torturing hour calls us to penance. More destroyed than thus, we should be quite abolished and expire. What fear we then? What doubt we to incense his utmost ire? Which to the height enraged will either quite consume us and reduce to nothing this essential, happier far than miserable to have eternal being. Or if our substance be indeed divine and cannot cease to be, we are at worst on this side nothing. And by proof, we feel our power sufficient to disturb his heaven, and with perpetual inroads to alarm, though inaccessible, his fatal throne. What if not victory is yet revenge? He ended, frowning, and his look denounced desperate revenge and battle dangerous to less than gods. On the other side uprose Belial, an act more graceful and humane. A fairer person lost not heaven. He seemed for dignity composed and high exploit, but all was false and hollow. Though his tongue dropped manna and could make the worse appear the better reason, to perplex and dash maturest counsels, for his thoughts were low. To vice industrious, but to nobler deeds timorous and slothful. Yet he pleased the ear, and with persuasive accent thus began. I should be much for open war, O peers, as not behind in hate. If what was urged main reason to persuade immediate war did not dissuade me most, and seemed to cast ominous conjecture on the whole success, when he who most excels in fact of arms, in what he counsels and in what excels mistrustful, grounds his courage on despair and utter disillusion, as the scope of all his aim, after some dire revenge. First, what revenge? The towers of heaven are filled with armed watch that render all access impregnable. Oft on the bordering deep encamp their legions, or with obscure wing, scout far and wide into the realm of night, scorning surprise. Or could we break our way by force, and at our heels all hell should rise with blackest insurrection, to confound heaven's purest light? Yet our great enemy, all incorruptible, would on his throne sit unpolluted, and the ethereal mold, incapable of stain, would soon expel her mischief and purge off the baser fire victorious. Thus repulsed, our final hope is flat despair. We must exasperate the almighty victor to spend all his rage, and that must end us. That must be our cure, to be no more. Sad cure. For who would lose, though full of pain, this intellectual being, those thoughts that wander through eternity, to perish, rather, swallowed up and lost in the wide womb of uncreated night, devoid of sense and motion? And who knows? Let this be good, whether our angry foe can give it or will ever. How he can is doubtful. That he never will is sure. Will he, so wise, let loose at once his ire, be like through impotence or unaware, to give his enemies their wish and end them in his anger, whom his anger saves to punish endless? Wherefore cease we then, say they who counsel war. We are decreed, reserved and destined to eternal woe. Whatever doing, what can we suffer more? What can we suffer worse? Is this then worst? Thus sitting, thus consulting, thus in arms? What, when we fled amain, pursued and strook with heaven's afflicting thunder, and besought the deep to shelter us? This hell then seemed a refuge from those wounds. Or when we lay chained in the burning lake? That sure was worse. What if the breath that kindled those grim fires awakened should blow them into sevenfold rage and plunge us in the flames? Or from above should intermitted vengeance arm again his red right hand to plague us? What if all her stores were opened, and this firmament of hell should spout her cataracts of fire, impendent horrors, threatening hideous fall one day upon our heads? While we perhaps designing or exhorting glorious war, caught in a fiery tempest, shall be hurled each on his rock transfixed, the sport and prey of racking whirlwinds, or forever sunk under yon boiling ocean, wrapped in chains, there to converse with everlasting groans, unrespited, unpitied, unreprieved, ages of hopeless end. This would be worse. War, therefore, open or concealed, alike my voice dissuades. For what can force or guile with him who deceive his mind, whose eye views all things at one view? He from heaven's height all these our motions vain sees and derides. Not more almighty to resist our might than wise to frustrate all our plots and wiles. Shall we then live thus vile? The race of heaven, thus trampled, thus expelled to suffer here chains and these torments? Better these than worse, by my advice. Since fate inevitable subdues us, an omnipotent decree, the victor's will. To suffer as to do, our strength is equal, nor the law unjust that so ordains. This was at first resolved, if we were wise, against so great a foe contending, and so doubtful what might fall. I laugh when those who at the spear are bold and venturous, if that fail them, shrink and fear what yet they know must follow. To endure exile or ignominy or bonds or pain, the sentence of their conqueror. This is now our doom, which if we can sustain and bear, our supreme foe in time may much remit his anger, and perhaps thus far removed, not mind us not offending, satisfied with what is punished. Whence these raging fires will slacken, if his breath stir not their flames. Our purer essence, then, will overcome their noxious vapor, or inured not feel, or changed at length, and to the place conformed in temper and in nature, will receive familiar the fierce heat, and void of pain. This horror will grow mild, this darkness light. Besides, what hope the never-ending flight of future days may bring, what chance, what change worth waiting, since our present lot appears for happy, though but ill not worst, if we procure not to ourselves more woe. Thus Belial, with words clothed in reason's garb, counseled ignoble ease and peaceful sloth, not peace. And after him thus Mammon spake: either to disenthrone the King of heaven we war, if war be best, or to regain our own right lost, him to unthrone, we then may hope when everlasting fate shall yield to fickle chance, and chaos judge the strife. The former vain to hope argues as vain the latter. For what place can be for us within heaven's bounds, unless heaven's Lord supreme we overpower? Suppose he should relent and publish grace to all, on promise made of new subjection. With what eyes could we stand in his presence humble, and receive strict laws imposed, to celebrate his throne with warbled hymns, and to his Godhead sing forced hallelujahs? While he lordly sits our envied sovereign, and his altar breathes ambrosial odors and ambrosial flowers, our servile offerings. This must be our task in heaven, this our delight. How wearisome eternity so spent in worship paid to whom we hate. Let us not then pursue by force impossible, by leave obtained unacceptable, though in heaven, our state of splendid vassalage, but rather seek our own good from ourselves, and from our own live to ourselves, though in this vast recess, free, and to none accountable, preferring hard liberty before the easy yoke of servile pomp. Our greatness will appear then most conspicuous, when great things of small, useful or hurtful, prosperous of adverse, we can create, and in what place soe'er thrive under evil, and work ease out of pain through labor and endurance. This deep world of darkness do we dread? How oft amidst thick clouds and dark doth heaven's all-ruling sire choose to reside, his glory unobscured, and with the majesty of darkness round covers his throne, from whence deep thunders roar, mustering their rage, and heaven resembles hell. As he our darkness, cannot we his light imitate when we please? This desert soil wants not her hidden luster, gems and gold, nor want we skill or art from whence to raise magnificence. And what can heaven show more? Our torments also may in length of time become our elements. These piercing fires, as soft as now severe, our temper changed into their temper, which must needs remove the sensible of pain. All things invite to peaceful counsels and the settled state of order, how in safety best we may compose our present evils, with regard of what we are and where, dismissing quite all thoughts of war. Ye have what I advise. He scarce had finished when such murmur filled the assembly as when hollow rocks retain the sound of blustering winds, which all night long had roused the sea, now with hoarse cadence lull seafaring men o'erwatched, whose bark by chance or pinnace anchors in a craggy bay after the tempest. Such applause was heard as Mammon ended, and his sentence pleased, advising peace. For such another field they dreaded worse than hell. So much the fear of thunder and the sword of Michael wrought still within them, and no less desire to found this nether empire, which might rise by policy and long process of time, in emulation opposite to heaven. Which then Beelzebub perceived, than whom, Satan except, none higher sat, with grave aspect he rose, and in his rising seemed a pillar of state. Deep on his front engraven deliberation sat, and public care, and princely counsel in his face yet shone, majestic though in ruin. Sage he stood, with Atlantean shoulders fit to bear the weight of mightiest monarchies. His look drew audience, and attention still as night or summer's noontide air, while thus he spake. Thrones and imperial powers, offspring of heaven, ethereal virtues, or these titles now must we renounce, and changing style be called princes of hell. For so the popular vote inclines, here to continue, and build up here a growing empire, doubtless. While we dream, and know not that the King of heaven hath doomed this place our dungeon, not our safe retreat beyond his potent arm, to live exempt from heaven's high jurisdiction, in new league banded against his throne, but to remain in strictest bondage, though thus far removed, under the inevitable curb, reserved his captive multitude. For he, be sure, in height or depth, still first and last will reign sole king, and of his kingdom lose no part by our revolt, but over hell extend his empire, and with iron scepter rule us here, as with his golden those in heaven. What sit we then projecting peace and war? War hath determined us, and foiled with loss irreparable. Terms of peace yet none vouchsafed or sought. For what peace will be given to us enslaved, but custody severe and stripes, and arbitrary punishment inflicted? And what peace can we return, but to our power hostility and hate, untamed reluctance, and revenge, though slow, yet ever plotting how the conqueror least may reap his conquest, and may least rejoice in doing what we most in suffering feel? Nor will occasion want, nor shall we need with dangerous expedition to invade heaven, whose high walls fear no assault or siege, or ambush from the deep. What if we find some easier enterprise? There is a place, if ancient and prophetic fame in heaven err not, another world, the happy seat of some new race called man, about this time to be created like to us, though less in power and excellence, but favored more of him who rules above. So was his will pronounced among the gods, and by an oath that shook heaven's whole circumference confined. And by an oath that shook heaven's whole circumference confirmed. Thither let us bend all our thoughts, to learn what creatures there inhabit, of what mold or substance, how endued, and what their power, and where their weakness, how attempted best by force or subtlety. Though heaven be shut, and heaven's high arbitrator sit secure in his own strength, this place may lie exposed, the utmost border of his kingdom, left to their defense who hold it. Here, perhaps, some advantageous act may be achieved by sudden onset, either with hellfire to waste his whole creation, or possess all as our own, and drive as we are driven, the puny habitants, or if not drive, seduce them to our party, that their God may prove their foe, and with repenting hand abolish his own works. This would surpass common revenge, and interrupt his joy in our confusion, and our joy upraise in his disturbance, when his darling sons, hurled headlong to partake with us, shall curse their frail original and fated bliss, fated so soon. Advise if this be worth attempting, or to sit in darkness here, hatching vain empires. Thus Beelzebub pleaded his devilish counsel. first devised by Satan, and in part proposed. For whence but from the author of all ill could spring so deep a malice, to confound the race of mankind in one root, and earth with hell to mingle and involve, done all to spite the great Creator. But their spite still serves his glory to augment. The bold design pleased highly those infernal states, and joy sparkled in all their eyes. With full assent they vote, whereat his speech he thus renews. All right, that's through line 389. Basically, we had, like, fittingly during the selection season, like CNN town hall meeting, or debate opening or closing arguments, and all of our candidates showing all the positions. All out war, stay in hell and make things here as good and comfortable as possible. Some middle way. Perhaps our matter will be different while we're here. This whole like version of new science. And then, of course, the plant, Beelzebub, sharing, promoting Satan's goal and model, which, of course, as we will see in a minute, is where we end up. All right, that was fun, and hopefully a little bit slower for people who aren't reading along with the book. Hope your Friday is as sunny as this one has been, and I'll be doing more tomorrow, picking up at, train right on time, picking up at book 2, line 390.